But Dad, Eric Wren pleaded. I don't really want to go to school today. From the front seat of the sleek XLR model self-driving car, his father spoke without turning. No one wants to go to school, Eric. I sure didn't. Eric examined his father. The man was balding. What hair he did have was beginning to turn gray. Certainly, he could undergo the treatments that would cover his head again in youthful black hair, like that of his only son. But Thomas Wren rather liked going bald. In fact, Eric's father rather liked growing old. He was strange like that. Thomas Wren was a particle physicist at Ethereal Concepts. During his off hours, he also served as one of the company's chief engineers. He had helped build the company from the ground up. Thomas's speech at EC's inaugural gala had been well received. The future of space travel is grounded in our ability to bring it to all corners of humanity. He still remembered the thunderous applause. Ethereal Concepts was a pioneer of engines, which used fission to power small to medium-range spacefaring vessels. The idea was not unlike detonating nuclear bombs. The outcome was unarguably superior. The engine that Thomas had designed could theoretically accelerate a 500-ton ship up to 67.25% the speed of light, the fastest engine ever built. He was immensely proud of that fact and would tell his wife and son about it often. From when he was very young, Thomas had known that humanity was destined to leave the cradle of Earth for the stars, and he wanted to be a part of that process. Despite his immense knowledge and understanding of the physics governing the laws of the universe, he was a rather simple man who liked simple things. He liked growing bald. He enjoyed reading poetry in a hammock by the little creek that carved a path through the family's backyard. Eric would see him sit down there for hours, with book in hand, the paper kind, and a smile glued to his face. Thomas even liked going to church, one of the few that still attended regularly. His friends loved to give him shit for that one. "Hey Thomas, are you hearing the voices again?" they chide. He would always smile at them, and without saying a word, change the subject to other matters. Eric had taken on some of his father's love of learning, but he had taken little of his father's love of meditation and quiet. To Eric, the world was a place full of possibility. It was why he hated school. Not because he hated learning, but because he knew he could learn so much more out there, in the real world. Always, he would try to convince his friends to join him out in the small forest near their suburban town. "We can play astronauts and aliens," he would tell them. Most of the time they would simply roll their eyes and say, "Eric, we can just play Astro Defender 4 online. It's better than silly imagination games." Eric never showed his disappointment. He would simply smile and change the subject to other matters. He was his father's son, after all. "Dad?" he asked, glancing out the window at the towering glass and steel skyscrapers that had sprung up in what was once a sleepy Midwestern town. There were no sleepy towns anymore. Progress was marching relentlessly forward. Humanity was well on its way to becoming something far more than it once was. "Yes, Eric." His father turned to glance at him again. "What do you think Mars will be like?" Eric asked, drawing a little circle with his finger in the fog lining the inside of the window. "Well, it'll be dry. We'll live inside of biospheres mostly." Thomas put down his data pad and looked at his young son fully. "But it's a great opportunity. I'll be the head of the whole Mars division of Ethereal Concepts. Without needing to worry about polluting the atmosphere, we'll be able to build at a much more rapid pace. It'll be huge for the progress of our expeditions into deeper space." Eric listened as his father began to speak more excitedly, as he always did when talking about his work. "A few more years down the line, and EC has plans to begin terraforming too. Wouldn't that be something? A new home, just like Earth, but with a new perspective." The balding man paused. After a moment, the excitement faded off his face. Thomas let out a sigh. "You shouldn't be thinking about that just yet. The ship has only just been finished. We won't be leaving for Mars for several months." Thomas Wren smiled at his son and reached over to tussle the long black hair that had once covered Thomas's own head. His son smiled back, the innocent smile of a child. Eric's gray eyes shimmered in the morning sunlight. "When we get there, you and your mother will have your work cut out for you. I think I'll make you pile rocks, a very, very large pile." Thomas smiled again. "Dad," Eric replied, frowning. "I don't want to pile rocks." "Well, maybe I'll make you go to school instead." Thomas chuckled. "There's going to be school on Mars too?" Eric asked, exasperated. "I'm afraid so. Learning is very imper." Suddenly, the datapad lit up and sounded a shrill set of urgent-sounding beeps and buzzes. Thomas Wren frowned and looked down at the screen. He pulled the datapad closer to his face to read the news, the creases on his face deepening as he read. Eric tried to see what he was looking at, but the text was too small. Then, a picture popped up, overlaying the text. It was a city, or what had been a city. The skeletons of mega skyscrapers glowed a dull red across a once beautiful skyline. The sky was filled with smoke and ash. Everywhere, there was rubble. Although he had no idea what he was looking at, Eric was suddenly very scared. "Dad, what is it? What is that picture?" he asked, failing to keep the fear out of his voice. His father didn't respond for a long time. The interior of the vehicle was completely silent. The silhouettes of the seemingly infinite towers of the city sped past. Eric could hear his own heartbeat. "XLR." His father finally spoke, only the faintest of tremors shaking his voice. "Yes, Mr. Wren," the cool female voice of the car answered. "New destination." Eric could hear the tone in his father's voice. He knew that something was wrong. "State destination," the car replied. "Ethereal Concepts, orbital launch pad," Thomas said, a blank expression covering his time-worn face. "Right away, Mr. Wren." The car agreed, and suddenly the XLR accelerated, cutting across several lanes through thick traffic. The other cars did not protest. Automation meant smooth sailing. The father glanced over at his young son. The innocence in Eric's eyes wouldn't last much longer. What was he going to tell him? What were they going to do? Thomas Wren suddenly felt a very strong desire to pray. Author's name and the link to original text is in the description. Consider tapping the thumbs up and pressing the subscribe button if you enjoyed this video.